Hey everybody, I'm Jack Rita. This is Yes and Improv. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about a particular short form game that is highly entertaining for the audience. It's different from a lot of the scene work that you will typically do. And I want to talk about not only how it's performed, but some tips on how to conduct it both as a performer and as the conductor, which is an integral part of how story works. And like with a lot of improv games, I'm sure there's probably a lot of different ways to do it. So I'm going to describe the way that I most normally see it done and have performed it over many years. So this is an improv game where the performers are all going to stand in a line facing the audience, and there's going to be somebody else who is in front of them, either seated or kneeling, not blocking the audience's view of the performers' faces. And that person is basically conducting the story. And the way it works is they're going to be pointing at one of the players who will begin to narrate a story. And they will continue to talk for as long as they're being pointed at. And the conductor at some point will stop pointing at them and immediately point at somebody else. Now, the person who was talking has to stop talking immediately as soon as the person has stopped pointing at them. So they don't finish a sentence, they don't even finish a word, ideally. So if they're pointing at, they say, once upon a time, there was a little man and his name was Arnold, and he went to, and you stop right away. So you didn't even finish the word to. And when the conductor points at the next player, they're supposed to pick it up right where the other person left off. And so in order for this to work as something that is entertaining to the audience, but also compelling and a decent challenge for the performers, here are some tips and tricks. So the first one, as I've just been describing, is you stop immediately and the next player finishes out that word, that sound, even that diphthong, if that's what is happening. So this is very much a listening game for everybody who is not talking, which is going to be most of the performers. And this is typically an elimination game. So what will happen is you'll start with a certain number of players, 4, 5, 6, 8. I've seen it up to 10. I think 6 to 8 is the sweet spot. And when somebody messes up, they're going to be eliminated. And you get messed up by talking after someone, the conductor has stopped pointing at you, so you're still talking even though they're pointing now at somebody else. Not talking immediately when the conductor points at you. Not successfully completing a word that somebody starts. So they might have said serendipity, and then you're like, then he went to the market, and you're like, well, you didn't finish what this person was saying. So that's an elimination. You'd be eliminated for that. Or just gibberish, stalling. There's any number of things, poor syntax. At some point, if a chapter has gone on for a long time, the conductor is looking for reasons to get somebody to eliminate. And I'm going to get more on that here in just a moment. But there are plenty of reasons to find a way to eliminate somebody or to eliminate yourself. And then that basically ends the chapter and you start a new chapter. So the chapters don't end like a normal chapter would. They end with an elimination and you move on to the next one. And you get down to 2 people, and there's a few techniques that you can do to make that, zany, if that's what you're after, or you can just conduct it cleanly, just like the previous chapters, until there's one person left standing, and that's where the game ends, and you have a winner, or it ends. So it doesn't necessarily have to be presented as a competition. So let's talk about some of the other techniques. I think as a performer, you want to be looking at the conductor. So the temptation is to look at the audience, but it's going to be difficult for you to be as precise as you should be doing this improv game if you're not looking at that conductor and knowing when they're pointing at you and when they are the exact moment they're stopped pointing at you, because that's what makes it interesting and entertaining for the audience. They want to see that quick witted action unfold right before them. And that's what makes it an amazing improv game, is where somebody is talking and then this person finishes it up, just seamlessly. And that the idea is that how long can it be sustained? But at the same time, you don't want to have a game of story that lasts for 45 minutes. I don't think. Maybe that's a gimmick that you're going for, but typically, if you're doing short form improv, which this is usually employed for, 45 minutes would be way too long. 5 to 8 minutes, maybe, depending on how many of the performers are. The chapters should each be 45 seconds to a minute or so, give or take. Again, the story itself can be highly entertaining and funny. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's the real thing, is that you have to be paying attention. You're listening if you're not the one talking, but you're paying close attention to that conductor. And the conductor can help the players out. So when I'm conducting story, I like to give everybody a chance to talk in that first chapter. And one of the techniques that I use is, while I'm pointing at somebody, I will then look at the next player that I'm going to point to. I'm giving them the heads up. And normally we've discussed this, we've rehearsed it ahead of time, so they know. They're not having to figure out, why is he looking at me? They know. So they know if I'm starting with one player and I'm looking at the next one, that is who I'm going to go to. And I usually will wait to switch for when somebody is finishing a sentence or they're taking a breath. It's a natural moment to switch. So nobody is super surprised by it. They see it coming. And you are teaching the audience how the game is supposed to work. So the idea is to not pull these antics and trip people up or lay these potential traps for them early on. You're going to resort to that later on. So the first chapter starts off relatively slow pace, and you're establishing, you get everyone a chance to contribute to it, because somebody is going to get eliminated. And after everybody has talked, let's say you've got 8 people doing this game of story. So that's, everyone's getting about 20 seconds or so to contribute. Then it's going to be time for somebody to eliminate. And the players ideally know that. They're in on that. They know that for the good of the show and the good of the game, that eliminations need to happen. And I think it's also best when you're explaining this game to the audience, and I like to keep the explanations pithy, but I let them know it's an elimination game, and players will be eliminated for the following reasons: not starting talking when I point at them, still talking after I pull my hand away, not completing a sentence. Those are the examples I give. And then I'll say, or anything else that looks fishy to me as the conductor or the referee or whatever you're calling that person as the host. You like your first couple of eliminations to be those examples that you've given and not have to get really creative with reasons that you're eliminating. So, and a group, a troupe that has good rapport and a good understanding of not just everybody's abilities, but how the show overall is going, how that particular game is going. You get an instinct for who the audience wants to hear more from. And those are not the people who should be trying to take themselves out of the game. And that's a kind of a fuzzy area that it just takes a lot of practice and experience to get a good, strong instinct for how that works. But you know that if you sort of stumbled over something, but the conductor didn't eliminate you, they gave you a little bit of latitude on that one. You're like, you know what? I probably would have been eliminated if this were later in the game. It would be a good way to get called out. So I should definitely throw myself on the sword the next time that the conductor points at me for this particular chapter. So that's one of the things that you want to pay attention to. In terms of techniques for the story itself, it just, first of all, it depends on what kind of a story you're setting it up. A lot of times we describe this as it's a children's story. so that you can keep things relatively simple. I think no matter what sort of genre or techniques you're using for that story, keeping the number of characters to a minimum. My rule of thumb is there shouldn't be more characters than there are performers telling that story. And even if there's 8 and there's 8 characters, that's already, it feels like a lot. I mean, new characters can come in later on, but identify what's this story about, who are the main characters or the main character, and keep them driving the action, and mix in some amount of dialogue. But again, keep in mind you're trying to stick to whatever type of story it is. And maybe that's not something that's been determined or made aware to the audience, but you as a troupe should have some kind of understanding that unless you say, yes, we're going to tell a science fiction story, or we're going to tell a Charles Dickens-esque tale, or this is the lost play of Shakespeare, or something like that, unless you're setting that up, then you should have an understanding of what kind of story you tell. And I think children's story is a great technique to use because it's still a pretty wide open genre. It doesn't have to be see spot run's good. It can be more sophisticated than that. But it doesn't have to necessarily be Dickens or Shakespeare. So we talked about your first couple of eliminations should be somebody not talking right away, or somebody who keeps talking after the moderator has stopped pointing at them. But after that, you're looking for some more creative. And part of it can happen organically. So people they stumble over their words, or they finish, they think they're finishing a word, but it ends up being a nonsense word, or it's gibberish, or it's not a real word. And that can be grounds for an elimination. Sometimes you can do a quick switcheroo, switch to somebody, switch right back to them. They're not necessarily expecting them. I sometimes will then use I'm looking at you against them. So I'll be looking at that person, and then I'll point to somebody else, and then they'll be like, or I do the whoop. I wasn't really pointing at you. I swooped past you, and they're like, and you're like, oh, I have 2 people talking at once, but I wasn't pointing at so-and-so. So this person is still in. This one is eliminated. As a conductor, you sometimes have to get creative about that. Some techniques when you get down to the 2 people is, one of them is you point at both of them at some point. I've seen people start that last chapter with both people talking at once. And each one is usually telling their own story. They're not necessarily trying to say the same thing, like a Dr. Sheraton thing, although I have also seen that happen as well. But it is sometimes funny to have 2 people talking at once, and then one stops, and then you switch over to the other one, because they're not normally listening to each other's stories. So that's a fun way to get the final elimination, because again, you're ratcheting up the tension for the audience and for the performers. I've also called people out for poor syntax and grammar, for inventing a character who wasn't even in the book, for introducing characters who have no business being in the book, or having a character that's like, that is not something that character would do. They would never do that. You're eliminated. And again, if you get eliminated, don't argue with the conductor. Think of the what's good for the show, and get them out of there. Keep things going. But again, the game should have a good pace. So the chapters will get a little bit shorter as they go on, because again, even on chapter 2, I like to give everyone a chance to talk, and then I'm starting to look for an elimination. Chapter 3. Everyone should still be able to participate, but that creates its own, because there are fewer people. Each chapter is naturally going to be a little bit shorter, and it's not up to the performers to do everything they can to not be eliminated. That's how you want it to look to the audience, but from a performance perspective, again, that could lead to a half an hour long story, which is I think, too long. I don't think, no matter how good the story's going, I think it will still feel too long to the audience. They're like, that game should have ended 15, 20 minutes ago, and it would have been great. So think about that. One other interesting technique that I've seen it done at the beginning of a game of story. I think it works better as something that is maybe introduced halfway through, like when we get down to the last 4 performers, especially if we've started with like 8 or even more, is that we say we're going to shake things up at this point, and we're now going to get either some genres or authors, famous authors with distinctive styles, and assign one to each performer. So whenever it is that they're speaking, they're not only continuing the story and completing somebody else's word or sentence, but they are then shifting the style of the story into whatever they have been assigned. So somebody might have Dr. Seuss, and somebody might have iambic pentameter, and somebody else might have H.P. Lovecraft, or Michael Crichton, or Stephen King, or Tom Clancy. And they just start introducing those genre elements to the story. It's a really funny way to shake up a game and, again, raise the stakes later on. But it's the sort of thing that your performers need to be capable of it. So it's something that you should practice. I've also seen it done in such a way that we let the performers choose. So we say, hey, we've gotten down to the last 4 players, and now we're going to raise the stakes, and we're going to have each one of them is going to now, whenever they are continuing the story, they're going to be also adding in a stylistic element. And I will let each performer let us know what stylistic element they're in. And I would say, well, I'm going to be making the story more Lovecraftian, or I'm going to be making it seem like it was written by a 6-year-old, or, in rhyming verse, whatever it is, whatever your particular talent or specialty is. It's a good way to showcase that. And the audience loves seeing that sort of thing. But you have to have the capability to do that. So that's why I kind of saved us to the end. So there's a lot of other things. I know we had one of our instructors, Patrick, his big pet peeve with story was don't have characters decide to do something. And it pops up a lot. They're like, Johnny decided to join the military. Just say Johnny joined the military, and just skip through it. They don't have to decide to do it. If you're going to say they're deciding to do it, it should be immediately followed up with what happened to prevent that from happening. That's really the only reason to add that in. But that's like a minor nit. But I promised that I would include that. So let me know in the comments if you have any other techniques for this game that you like to do or you like to see. Anything else that I have included in there. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I've seen story done a few other ways. Some successful, some not very successful. Like, I'm not sure why they did it that way. I don't want to cover it into. I don't want to open up a Pandora's box or jar, as it may be. But yeah, feel free to share your anecdotes and your philosophies for this. It's a great improv game. It's a nice way, if you're doing a short form show, to vary the types of things that you're doing. So it's not all just scenes or scene games, but this is a nice line game, and it's an elimination game as well that really can showcase the verbal skills of your improvisers. That's it for this one, everyone. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.